Chapter 3. Zack. Many sun revolutions earlier,
Zack was an outgoing child, quite the opposite to Zentran. Their diverse personalities had hindered initial acquaintance. A more unlikely pair of friends was hard to imagine. An instruction class on various forms of energy was to result in disregarding their differences. Zack realized, as did Zentran, that the instructor had overlooked an obvious energy source.
Mental energy.
Stated Zack, his extrovert nature prevailing.
What about mental energy?
Expecting some merit for his assertion, he received none. Instead, the instructor looked at him coldly for some time. Warning bell sounded for Zentran. He knew instinctively this was a subject to steer well clear of, but it was too late.
What do you mean by mental energy, Zack?
The cutting tone in the instructor's voice sent Zentran's warning bells into overload. Zack had already sealed his fate, but he still answered proudly.
I can move things around with the intention in my mind, so there must be energy there.
Another instructor was summoned, who ushered Zack from the instruction room as if he had some highly contagious disease. Zentran knew Zack had been right, because he'd made the same observation. He could do it too. Telekinesis was not entertained by the instructor. Such a notion of fantasy was criminal. Zentran's instinct was confirmed, but Zack was to learn this lesson severely and pay a price no living entity should afford. A different Zack was eventually returned to instruction class. His extrovert nature had been replaced by the blank stare common to most adults. It was Zentran's first encounter with the harm of deprogramming. Curiosity compelled Zentran to make acquaintance with the quiet individual Zack had become. Zack's brash claim to the same ability he possessed couldn't be ignored. He found Zack's home to be one for the abandoned and orphaned when accompanying him there after an instruction class.
Show me how you can move objects with your mind.
Zentran asked, hoping his question would appear innocuous.
No, it's impossible.
Zack answered too quickly. Zentran left it at that. Anything further would have drawn the same response, or worse. On a later occasion, Zentran invited Zack to accompany him after instruction class. Hoping to stir a bit of the old Zack, Zentran brought him to an underground storm drain that had its inlet in a nearby aircar pad. He knew the tunnel exited on the other side of the hill where sunlight barely reached. The beginning of the dark zone. Instruction class had taught demons abounded in this forbidden zone and prohibited venture there. Absence of qualifying information, however, had stirred Zentran's curiosity. He mentioned none of this to Zack. Zack was hesitant to follow Zentran's example of lying on his stomach and sliding into the opening. He eventually did, although the conditioning he'd received hindered him. Before they'd gone very far, Zack wanted to turn back.
There is something exceptional to see at the other end of this tunnel.
Zentran assured him, keeping it a mystery.
You'll be amazed.
But what is it?
It's difficult to describe. You have to see it for yourself to appreciate it.
Later, Zack protested again.
You didn't tell me it was this far. We must go back now.
We've already come so far. There's no point in going back now. I'm pretty sure you wouldn't want to miss out on what's at the end.
It was a long way. When at last the two emerged from the tunnel, they sat in the near darkness on an outcrop of rock to catch their breath. A stream gurgled its way over rocks close by. The physical exertion irritated Zack.
What is this place?
It's the beginning of the dark zone.
What? We're not supposed to be here?
Don't worry, there aren't any demons.
Zack was now clearly on edge.
Is this what you dragged me out all this way to see?
The sight of the desert, with its unspoiled outcrops of rock, had inspired Zentran to frequent previous visits. The stream winding its way through the rocks in the near darkness complemented the spectacle. Zack noticed none of this, even though their eyes had become accustomed to the darkness in the tunnel.
No.
Zentran replied, keeping it simple.
Well, what is it then?
A rock.
A rock? You brought me all this way to look at a rock?
Yes.
Zack considered the absurdity and became angry.
Which rock?
Zentran pointed to one in front of them. It wasn't a very large rock compared to others in the vicinity, only slightly larger than a stone. Time and water friction had relentlessly worn it into a smooth oval shape. Nothing about the rock's size or shape held any fascination for Zack. Its surface had no distinguishing features. Even the type and makeup were not unusual. Zack was puzzled, but continued to look at the commonplace rock. It slowly came to him through the fog of his deprogramming. The exceptional spectacle Zentran had brought him to see had little to do with the rock. The sight impacted on him now. He moved his hands around it as there was no visible support. It was suspended in front of them by some invisible energy. He thought he recalled something, but had difficulty placing it. He fought to remember. The energy supporting the rock seemed to be emanating from Zentran. Zentran's smile confirmed that. Zack's body shook as conflict inside him grew. His conditioning impinged, forcing disbelief, as this was not the way of things. The contrary evidence in front of him stirred something from his past. The memory of it gradually seeped through his mental block. Zentran didn't rush him. There was no hurry. Exhilaration engulfed Zack as his awareness returned. He turned to Zentran, who was smiling broadly now. In this moment at the beginning of the Dark Zone, their bond of uncompromised friendship came to be. Both of them burst into uncontrollable laughter and embraced like brothers.